Hello and welcome to Gin with Gwyn. I'm Oliver Gwyn, and this is where I give my off-the-cuff and unrehearsed thoughts on marketing, data, and philosophy. This week, I'm doing a viewer-requested video, so if you want me to talk about something, then I will talk about whatever you want. And I'm talking about relationship advice. And hopefully, I've got some tips here that are good for both romantic relationships and business relationships. So my first tip is triage today. In life, you're always going to have little problems, things are going to happen that you're not happy about, and try and deal with those small problems as quickly as possible. If you're a manager and somebody does something that you're like, oh, this isn't quite right, and I'm not quite happy with it, try and deal with it quite quickly, or certainly within the same day if it doesn't disrupt the flow of what you're doing. And if you're in a relationship and something happens, you're like, oh, I don't really like what you said there, or something along those lines, try and deal with it quickly. Because and I know this is a stereotype, but one thing that men often complain about with women is that they will have an argument with their spouse and suddenly the wife will say, 6 months ago you did this, and 4 months ago you did this, and blah, 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 blah. And it creates a real problem where you feel like every single thing that you have done wrong, often things that you didn't even know you'd done wrong, is being counted and it's going to be brought up at any time to be brought up against you. And secondly, even in that situation where it's just like, I'm upset, and here's all the things I've been upset about. What are you supposed to do? You can't go back in time and solve those issues. And so try and deal with problems as quickly as is possible. Now, I spoke with my book club about this. Hi, Hannah, if you're watching, by the way. And they said, women are such people pleasers that they don't want to bring up these little things that annoy them. They don't want to be seen as a pest. They don't want to be seen as sort of micromanaging in a way. But I think that's a lot better than having this long list of things that is an issue and bringing them up long after the issue could have been solved. So don't worry so much about that. As long as you then solve the issue on the day, and even if it's just to say, "Oh, actually, this annoyed me," and the person can be like, "Oh, I'm sorry that annoyed you," that might be it. But also, you have to try and let go of the little things in life so you can focus on the things that are really important to you. The next one is on a similar sort of theme. So don't pick catharsis over conclusions. What do I mean by this? I think sometimes you are emotional about something. And sometimes in the heat of an argument, what can happen that is not very productive in the relationship is that you talk about an issue, the person responds, you kind of come to a conclusion, but you're not satisfied in that moment. You've not quite got your anger and frustration out, or whatever it might be. You've not got quite got out your sadness. And so there's a bit of a distraction, and then you actually start the loop again, and you end up having the same conversation 3 times. And what could be solved within half an hour gets solved in 2 hours, or a whole afternoon is spent on this long argument. And it's a case of wanting your feelings to be fully out and to be fully satisfied that your feelings are out. But ultimately, that's not very fair on your partner if they are engaging with you, if they're listening with you, if they're trying to solve those problems, or at least trying to come to a point where they can understand and they can say sorry and it doesn't happen again. By going round in circles, it really sort of punishes them for doing the work, which is communicating well. And so it might be difficult if you're not fully satisfied that the issue has been addressed, or you feel like you're not quite over it. But if there has been a reasonable conclusion to it and there's a step forward and there's a plan, maybe you then need to go away and spend your own time and get those feelings fully out in a different way, in a healthy way, and come back to the relationship. Because by repeating things, then you're only hurting the relationship a little bit, and you're only adding strain on, because the message it sort of sends is, hey, if there's something wrong, we can come up with the right conclusion. I can be there, but then it's going to be a whole afternoon of my life. I'm going to have to go for it 3 or 4 times. It's going to be such a hassle that I'm going to avoid these conversations. And that's not what you want. You don't want to be avoiding difficult conversations. You want to be having them. And it's also not good to sort of have a conclusion if you feel like you're not really happy with it, or if you're just going along with it. And maybe you need to come back to somebody a couple of days later and say, I know we had this conclusion, but actually I still feel like this. And is there some way that you could accommodate that? So don't chase catharsis over conclusions. The third one is a little bit controversial. I saw this interview with Stephen Grosh, who I met the other day. Hi, Stephen. And Slavoj Žižek, who I've mentioned a lot of times and I'm very interested in, and says some interesting things. And he said, I don't give a shit about your feelings. Feelings are ridiculous. You can't judge one person's feelings over another. And I'm not that harsh. I think feelings are not ridiculous. They're a really important thing. But you are not responsible for other people's feelings. You have no control over that. And don't ever think that that's the case. And what do I mean by this? I really mean that I can say anything to you and it can upset you. I can say that the sky is grey and that might upset you for whatever reason. I don't have any control over the way that you are feeling. And so you are not responsible for upsetting somebody. You're not responsible for the feelings that you elicit, whether you mean to do that or not. And so all you can do in that situation is listen to the other person, acknowledge their feelings, explain to them what you meant, what your sentiment was, what your objective was when you were saying that thing, and hopefully come to a middle point where you both understand each other. But you're not beholden to other people's feelings. And I guess that comes back to my catharsis point, where you cannot control the way that somebody reacts to something and what's going on in their life and what a past trauma they might have. And they have to understand that that is the case to some point, that you are not responsible for the reaction. You can only control your input. The next point is maybe a bit more, and I guess on this as well, in terms of other people's feelings, sometimes in business as well, people will be feeling that if you criticize their work or you're trying to improve things and they see it as a criticism or they feel like you're attacking them, you can't control that. You might just be genuinely trying to help. And so it's about, how do you communicate that afterwards? How do you try and go forward so they don't feel like they're being attacked? But ultimately, you can't control their feelings. If they're feeling insecure about their job, there's nothing that you can do. The fourth point is nobody can complete you, and you can't seek to find the things that you're missing in your own self in other people. And this sounds like more of a romantic point, but I was actually thinking of this from a business point of view. So often we try and find the people who complement us, which makes sense. If we're not an outgoing person, we'll go and find outgoing people for sales. Or if we're not great at numbers or whatever, we'll go find someone that complements us. But then we have expectations on them that, hey, I'm frustrated and I don't know this thing, and I'm hoping that you will fill that gap. And we can't find always people that will completely complete us or always going to have a deficit for us. They will have their own things that their strengths and weaknesses are. And so you can never have people that completely complete you, and you can't hope to find that in another person. You can only hope to find that in yourself. Having somebody in your team that is outgoing is not necessarily going to make you outgoing, even if you hope that it will. And so other people can't complete us. We can only work to strengthen ourselves and do the hard work for ourselves first, and then hopefully other people will complement that. The next point is when we're looking at people, whether that's hiring people, whether that's romantically, what do we look for? Because in both cases where you're dating somebody or you're hiring somebody, the process is kind of similar in a way. You have a very small sliver of time to get to know people, and then you're making quite a big decision on the back of it. You interview somebody for a few hours, and then you're going to spend 6 months of salary on them. Probably you'll give them at least 6 months, or maybe you're still spending 3 months of salary, and they might be completely useless, and that's a complete waste of money. And similarly, when you're dating somebody, you have a few short dates, and normally from that point on, you decide, okay, let's do something a bit more exclusive. And then again, you might have 3-4 months where you're dating them, and it turns out what they told to you on the dates was completely not true. And so what do you look for in these circumstances? And I think there's one quality that outshines all the others, which is consistency of character, consistency of communication, consistency of actions over words. And people will always reveal themselves in time. People, one of the most common complaints is that, they seemed great in the interview, or they seemed great when I was dating them, and then suddenly they weren't the same, or they weren't acting the same, or whatever. But judge people on their actions and not their words. Consistency will always shine through. People will always show their true colors. And over time, you will always understand what they really meant and how often they put their best foot forward, because that's a natural thing to do in an interview or in a dating situation. So look for consistency, and look for times where people are not being consistent as sort of the major red flag, or there is not a strong alignment between their actions and their goals. And this comes up to the last point I have, which is alignment is very strongly in relationships, whether they're business or romantic. Alignment between your head, your heart, and your actions. Too often people don't align. They say they are looking for the love of their life. They want something serious, but they don't take it seriously. They don't fill in their dating profile. They don't message people back. It's crazy to me that you would not put in the effort and expect the outcome, that you're just hoping, oh, maybe I'll meet somebody and the right person will come along. No, that's not really likely to happen. You have to put in the hard work. And you also have to put in the hard work so that when you meet the right person, that you're in the right place to be able to have that relationship and communicate well and understand what you want from the relationship. And too often we chase the things that we think society wants from us. We chase serious relationships and marriage and kids, but we're not really set up for those things, whether that is on a practical level that we couldn't afford kids if they came along today. We don't have the visa to be with our partner, so that's an extra hurdle. And all of these things can be overcome with hard work, but you have to put in the hard work to begin with. And the same is true in business. We want the better job and we want to move to the bigger company and we want to be an authority in our field, but we're not willing to do the work and do the talks where nobody shows up and host the webinars where nobody cares and post the articles that nobody reaches. And so consistency is important because we are what we do repeatedly more than we are anything else. And so if you don't have alignment between your actions and your goals, then you're never going to achieve the thing that you ultimately want. And so those are my thoughts on relationships. Relationships in business and in love are difficult. They evolve over time as you evolve over time, and they're never going to be the same year in, year and out. It takes a lot of work to renew a relationship and keep it strong and to deepen the relationship. But ultimately, what does it come down to? I think it comes down to candor. It comes down to honesty from both parties so that you can communicate well. And too often the problem is that because we want something from somebody else, we want romance and we want to spend our lives with somebody, or we want a good working relationships, we're not having those candid conversations where we say, hey, actually, we need to do the work so that we can improve and we can strengthen those things at a deeper level, which will actually strengthen our relationship in the long term. Everything is work. And so are you willing to do the work? These have been my thoughts this week on relationships and communication. I hope this was interesting to you. If you want me to talk about something next week, put it down in the comments below or send me a message. Thanks very much for watching.